Hi, I'm Stacey. This is Benji. My eldest son is 23. Then I have a daughter who is 6 in January. I had a miscarriage, so I had Brooke 2 years ago, and then Benji, and he's 6 months.
You've got a big breadth of experience from your first child to this child, haven't you?
Yeah,
Did you say your oldest is?
23.
Yeah, so you must have had him in your late teens, early 20s.
Early 20s, yeah. I had him 3 weeks before my 21st.
That's got to be quite different to your latest in terms of like just how things were in yourself and how the hospital was and
With my first son, I had to have a cesarean with him because he was breech. But I did breastfeed him. I breastfed him for 8 months, but I really struggled. And I think being quite young, I really felt like I was kind of just pushed to, well, I'll just give him formula. And I really didn't want to. So I stuck with using the shields that I ended up with. And I fed him for 9 months and then he bit me
oh,
when he was teething. And there was just no support really to say like how to persevere and kind of work through that. So I ended up stopping feeding him at 8 months, but it was still 8 months, which is better than nothing, I guess.
I mean, 23 years ago, that was kind of, I mean, I've spoken to another mother who had a child in their sort of early 20s and has a young baby. And yeah, there wasn't really a lot of support. In fact, was there even an infant feeding team at that time?
Not that I was aware of. No, it was
Yeah,
literally just in the hospital. And in fact, it was a student midwife who said about using the shields. The actual midwives
right.
were like, oh, we'll just give him formula. But it was a student, and she went upstairs to the neonatal unit and came back with a shield.
I find it interesting how much has changed in 20 years. Interestingly, the statistics haven't changed as much as you'd expect, like given the amount of support. It's great that that support's there, and I think they do an amazing job. But you'd sort of imagine 20 years there'd be like this radical change, which there hasn't really been in the statistics. I mean, I'm not speaking as an expert here, but it seems like they haven't really budged as much as you'd expect. You'd sort of think that they would have at least kind of quadrupled. But 20 years ago, I'm not sure. I could probably ask Google like what was the breastfeeding rate 20 years ago, but I've got a feeling it wasn't as drastically lower than now. Do you think that's because people are either motivated like you were to breastfeed or they're not, and a lot of it's kind of cultural, or what do you think would be the reason for that?
I think a lot of it is convenience, if I'm honest. Breastfeeding's hard. It's really hard work, and I think it's all on the mother. And I think nowadays it's easier just to bottle feed, I think.
Yeah, breastfeeding rates in 2005, which I know is, it's not quite the length of time that we're saying, 78%.
Wow.
I mean, it's kind of 72% now.
For me, breastfeeding was always something that I really wanted to do. And I think because I had a cesarean the first time round, I kind of had this notion in my head of I hadn't done it myself. So I'd kind of failed on some level.
Really, even though you fed for all those months?
No, that was why I wanted to feed. Partly why I wanted to feed, not the whole reason, but it was so important to me that I fed because I felt like I hadn't brought him into the world myself. They did.
Oh, I see. So it was like you wanted to really just feel that you had managed to do
Yeah.
this thing
Yeah.
yourself. So you knew about it. Were you breastfed?
Yeah.
Ah, yeah.
I don't think at the time breastfeed because like I said, I was 3 weeks before my 21st. So the other people that I knew who had children my age weren't breastfeeding. And it's not something I really remember seeing a lot of.
No, I wouldn't say I ever saw any.
Yeah. I had one family member who she's a nurse and she was very pro breastfeeding. And I think on some level that's where I got it from, this desire to do it. She was a really good role model for me. So that was with him. And then with my daughter, I had qualified as a nurse by then. And I was working in the hospital and I knew that I was going to breastfeed her. And I had a little trouble in the beginning. Like for a couple of weeks, it was really painful and I really struggled. But there was a little bit of support there. Actually, no, there was quite a lot of support there because it used to be breastfeeding buddies in Bradford. I had help from them and I had help from someone in the hospital. And within a couple of weeks, we'd cracked it and I was able to feed her directly myself and wasn't having any problems. She was born in 2019 and then COVID hit and it was time for me to go back to work. And I was adamant, I am not going to stop breastfeeding this child because we don't know what this is. She's too young we're not even getting vaccinated. But when we do get vaccinated, they won't be vaccinating children this young, babies. So me breastfeeding her was, to me, the only way that I could protect her. The job I had at the time, I was literally face to face with COVID for like 13 hours a day, unvaccinated, absolutely terrified, going home, getting changed outside my house, putting all my clothes in a pillowcase as a wash bag. And, it was a nightmare. But I was, no, I'm going to keep breastfeeding my daughter. And she was between a year and a year and a half. And my employer actively encouraged me to stop feeding her because they wanted me to work nights. And this is the NHS, and I refused. Absolutely point. Like it got really messy, and I had to get a union involved. It was awful.
I'm amazed that they would be interfering with such an intimate relationship. I mean, that's really none of their business.
No, there's a lady called Ria.
I know her. Yeah, she's brilliant, isn't she?
I contacted her and I'm like, Ria, can you help me out here? Like, do I have any rights here? Because they're really almost to the point of bullying to make me stop feeding.
So were you an A&E nurse or were you on the sort of chest and you were A&E?
Yeah.
Yeah, that was a really strange time, wasn't it? And suppose they were so desperate for nurses to come in, they just were like acting out in some weird way, putting you under pressure.
I mean, I didn't. I refused. I absolutely point blank refused to stop feeding her. I said no, and I left my job.
Did you?
I left. I've never been back to A&E since, and it broke my heart to leave because being an A&E nurse was me through and through. It's what I'd always wanted to do, and I just felt like I was being made to choose between how I feed my child and my job. And even in an ordinary time, I think that would have been totally unfair. But during a global pandemic, I was like, this is not happening. Like, I'll leave. You can have me for my contracted hours during the day, or you can not have me at all. Like, I'm not going to stop feeding her. I have to protect her. So, yeah, I mean, feeding her in itself was fine. Didn't have any problems. Fed her till she was 3. So that was fantastic. And it ended just totally naturally. It just came to a stop as it was meant to be. And I was absolutely fine with that. And she was fine with that. And so I was really proud of myself that I managed to achieve all of that.
Yeah, that's nice when you can feed full term. I mean, it's not something even people know about because everybody's told to feed till 6 months and
Yeah.
or maybe to a year, but nobody realizes. I honestly think people don't realize that children naturally wean themselves
Yeah.
at about 3 when they've got their molars and they're kind of a bit bigger and they're just a bit more eating more food and
Yeah.
it's just a completely normal process that
Yeah.
I think it would make life so much easier for mothers who have toddlers who want to feed if they sort of could see good role models of like, you just it does end, it does naturally end. And if it doesn't, it's possibly because the child has additional needs that haven't yet been identified.
Yeah. Absolutely. But the benefits are there, and I had the odd comment. Well, how long are you gonna feed her for? Like, is she gonna still be feeding her when she's going to school? And I'm like, actually, if you look, the World Health Organization says feed until 2 and beyond. It doesn't say what age. Okay, well, it's the third birthday tomorrow, so I have to stop tomorrow. It's not like that. Like, she'll stop when she's ready to stop, and I was very, very adamant, very adamant. But that journey with her was perfect.
Well, apart from the totally extraneous circumstances of a global
Well, yeah.
pandemic and having to leave your job in order to carry on feeding her, I always sort of am amazed the number of factors that are in a feeding journey. And the infant feeding team, for example, are totally focused on those technical problems at the beginning, and rightly so. But there's so many other issues. When I speak to women, it's like partners and parents and work and money, and it's a whole fraught kind of bag of different things. In your case, did you go back to work after that time? Are you still nursing or somewhere else?
Yes, I work at the university now. I'm an adult nursing lecturer.
Oh,
But after I left A&E, I went to the cardiology day unit. So it meant I could still work days, but I didn't have to work weekends and I didn't have to work any nights. But it was mostly the fact that I didn't have to work nights because I had weaned it to the point where it meant I could express my milk and I could leave it for my husband or whoever grandparents to give her it in a cup. But she was older by then. She wasn't 6 months old. She was old enough to drink out of a cup anyway. So during my 12-hour shift, I would express at work, which was another issue. I'd looked at all my rights and it said about having a safe place to store my milk, which I wasn't given. I had to use the staff fridge, which often the door was left open or it had other people's lunch in there. There was an occasion where a rat had been seen running across the floor in the break room right by the fridge. I wasn't given a room, a private room, a private space, even. They had some building work going on, so I had to feed in like the basement room, which was like the staff room. But everyone and anyone could just walk in and out of there, and I wasn't given any time to express. I had to do it on my break.
they don't have a policy, it sounds like. Sounds like they don't have a
Oh, they
breastfeeding
do.
policy in the
Oh, they do.
hospital.
Yeah,
But if they have a policy, then they should be
yeah,
providing all of that.
yeah.
They're not enforcing the policy.
No,
Because, you sometimes workplaces will say they've got a policy, but it's not really a policy because, they're not enforcing it.
yeah. I'm sure that they do have a room now, but I don't know. I never went in it, and I don't know if there's a fridge in it. And it was on the main concourse. It was a room off the main concourse, I think, which is great if you're nearby. But the whole nature of nursing is that you're so understaffed, you can't leave the unit. You can't just
Yeah,
walk off. And A&E was miles away from the main concourse. I'd have wasted all my break just there and back and expressing. I wouldn't have had a break.
yeah,
It feels to me like more like a token gesture putting just one room in the hospital. Like this hospital's huge. It didn't work, but I just got to a point where I thought, well, I'm going to express anyway. And if you don't like it, then leave.
yeah. A bit like feeding, just like this is your right. So you
Yeah.
need to do it where it's convenient. People always wonder why the UK has such a low breastfeeding rate. And like when you compare it to America, it's astounding that a country that has only 3 months maternity leave has a better breastfeeding rate than the UK. But a lot of the reason for that is because in America, women have creches inside the buildings where they work if they work for corporations, because there's a lot of employment in corporations. And so like a huge employer like the NHS is the equivalent to a corporation should really have on-site creche and facilities for parents. There's like so many women working in every hospital. All of them are using a fragmented childcare system, taking their small children all over the place. It seems to me like these are the sort of really obvious things that are never looked at in terms of attrition of staff and burnout. They talk endlessly about how can we get staff to stay, but like just looking at women's biology doesn't seem to be a factor. Also the 12-hour shifts. Like, why are women who have children being expected to work 12 hours? This is not at all a family-friendly way to work.
No, that's exactly what I was doing, like 13-hour days.
By the time you get to work and from work, you're looking at maybe 14 hours, which is leaving
Yeah,
you a
easily.
very short amount of time to sleep and get back to work again. Like, when
Yeah.
do you see your children? So I think It's interesting, isn't it? Because a lot of workplaces have become much more flexible, like since COVID. That's the big change, isn't it? That like
Yeah.
people can work from home. I appreciate you can't nurse from home, but there needs to be surely some sort of understanding or appreciation that nursing isn't a family friendly job. And that's why a lot of women are leaving because they can go to something else where they have far more flexibility and more choice.
Also, nursing is predominantly a female role.
Exactly, that's what I'm saying. It's a female dominated job that has in the NHS very little provision for women,
Yeah.
for their bodies, for their children, you know.
They're very much about promoting breastfeeding for patients,
Yeah,
and you'll see that. But then the second that patient becomes a staff member as well, it's like the rules don't apply anymore. And no, you need to get back to work. I was like, but the health benefits I'm giving my child, I think they were just so short-sighted. The benefits for any child who's breastfed long term is they're going to save money.
if you have a company of staff who themselves have experienced breastfeeding, they're going to be far better placed to promote breastfeeding, aren't they?
Yeah.
The number of women I interview who, for one reason or another, their babies ended up or they've ended up on a different unit, like cardiology, the NICU, whatever, and they're constantly encountering nurses there who don't have the expertise that maybe the midwifery staff have. And a lot of that can also be because they're working in units where they themselves can't breastfeed, where it's not possible for them to breastfeed. You can't really have one rule for patients and another for staff. That doesn't make any sense, does it?
No, exactly.
It's crazy. I wonder if Unison have ever done any campaign on that. Was it Unison that you,
No, I was with the RCN.
RCN?
To be fair, they were brilliant. They were so good. And in fact, the second I told them, they said, you've got grounds for a grievance here. Like, this is major discrimination. Breastfeeding mothers are protected characteristics and all the rest of it. And they were like, you really could like nail them to the wall for this. And I said, no, that's not what this is about. This is not why I've come to you. I'm not trying to cause trouble. I just want them to do what they said they'd do before I started the job. I made it very, very clear that I was breastfeeding and wouldn't be able to work nights before I even applied for the job. I'd been in and I'd seen the matron and I'd said, look, I don't want to waste your time, but this is where I'm at and this is what I need. If it's something you can accommodate, I would definitely be interested in applying for the job. And to begin with, she was great. You know, she was like, yes, yeah, yeah, come on board. We're a really big team. We can definitely accommodate it. Within 4 weeks, I was on the night shift rota. And I'm like, every month I had to fight and say, no, you need to change it. I'm not working nights. And it just became a nightmare. It was awful. And it was sad. I didn't want to leave.
It's tragic, isn't it, to lose a valuable member of staff?
I didn't want to cause trouble and I didn't want to point fingers and I didn't want any of that. I just wanted them to say, yeah, okay, let's just take you off nights, like we said, and you let us know where you're at. That's all I wanted them to do.
This time round with your baby, has there been any sort of standout situation with that, or has that been like finally a straightforward?
No, because I'd had my miscarriage, I think that, well, I know that that has massively impacted emotionally how I felt. And so breastfeeding him, it's amazing, but partly then I feel sad too because I feel this is what I should have been able to do for Brooke and I couldn't.
So sorry to hear that. So Brooke was the name of your baby that you lost.
Yeah, I really piled a lot of pressure on myself because I'd done it so well with my daughter. It was the one thing that I wasn't worried about. I'm like, yeah, I'm definitely going to breastfeed him. But because my mental health I was struggling towards the end of the pregnancy and I was getting really concerned that something wrong was going to happen. And I was just like, no, you need to get him out. He needs to come out. So I pushed and pushed to be induced. So he was born at 37 weeks, which I think, yes, it's full term, but it's early and he wasn't ready to come. Otherwise, I would have just gone into labour, obviously. So I think that partly affected the struggles that I had feeding him in the beginning. There was a lot of nipple trauma, a lot. Like he was taking chunks out of me, and the hospital, the maternity ward were not supportive at all. You ask for help and they just literally get hold of your baby's head and just shove them onto you. It's very forceful, which is not helpful. And it just caused more and more trauma. Anyway, one midwife on the night shift said, oh, just give it a go and I'll come back and check on you and see how you're getting on. Anyway, when she came back, I had actually managed to get him on and he was feeding. She was like, look, see, you can do it. You can do it. She never documented it. She never documented that she'd seen that I'd successfully breastfed him and latched him myself. Anyway, the next day, I was still struggling. I struggled again. So I rang the buzzer, asked for help, and they sent down this like healthcare support worker from upstairs who, again, was just not very nice. Got hold of his head, shoved him onto me, and then went and documented that I wasn't able to feed him. I couldn't do it for myself. So then the hospital didn't want to let me go home because they were like, well, we need to be sure that you can feed your baby. And I'm like, I can feed my baby. I'm just struggling. Like, he's feeding. I'm just in pain. He's fine. I'm not, but he is. It was really negative, and I ended up just doing what they wanted me to do. And I said what I needed to say to get discharged. And I came home and I was in a right mess. I did get some help from, she's called Wendy,
Yeah.
one of the senior infant feeding people.
Did you give birth at Airedale?
Yeah. So Wendy came round. I had lots and lots of support in the beginning, but for the first 5 weeks was horrendous. Like I was literally screaming in pain. I was bleeding. It was awful. But he was gaining weight. He was getting the milk. I just couldn't position him, couldn't latch him. I was getting more and more upset. And then one of the girls from the community infant feeding team, one of the healthcares came round and she said, try laying down. So I started being able to feed him laid down, but it was still really, really painful. But it meant that I could at least keep going. I was just getting to a point where I thought, I don't know how much longer I can do this for, like trying to sit up and all the different positions I tried, and I'm like, nothing's working.
Why do you think it was so painful? Was he tongue-tied, or was it because he was
No.
so small?
Yeah, maybe because he was so small.
His mouth was so small.
Yeah, Wendy looked and said he didn't have a tongue tie. I just couldn't position him. I couldn't get him to latch properly.
How did you get through that then?
I grit my teeth and I screamed and I cried.
You didn't switch to expressing, or?
I expressed a little bit, but not a great deal, but only just to sort of give like that side, the worst side, I would express off that just to give myself a little bit of a break. But I couldn't give that express milk to him anyway. I tried, I think, did I give it to him? No, I've never given him a bottle. No, I don't think he got the milk that I expressed. I can't remember. It's a bit of a blur. But yeah, that first 5 weeks was horrific. And, they all kept saying, you don't have to do this. You don't have to do this. And I'm like, yes, I do. Like, I know this is really hard. Like, I'm the one experiencing it. It can't be nice seeing me in pain like this, but don't tell me to stop. Give me a solution to make it better. Like, I don't want to stop. I'm going to feed this child no matter what happens. And he was gaining weight. So I knew he was getting what he needed. So then, yeah, it was Wendy said, let's try Shields. And I didn't really want to use Shields because it was a bit of a nightmare using them with my son. And I really don't want to use Shields. But I agreed to it. And now I can't get rid of them. I'm still using Shields, but he's 6 months and he's doing great.
Wow, 6 months and he's gained weight and you've used the shields the whole time. That's amazing.
Yeah. So hopefully,
I mean, you probably won't use them forever. At a certain point, you're just going to chuck them away and you're not going to need them.
Yeah, I'm hoping the bigger he gets, I'll get my confidence back and I'll be able to get rid of the shields. But I think it was more about me accepting that they were a tool just to enable me to keep feeding, because ultimately that was what I wanted.